So tonight's webinar is addressing critical vital signs that require regular and frequent attention by someone whose job it is to do so. And of course that's the key indicator, which is accountability or having a protocol. Protocol is like a checklist that whoever is accountable follows and reports what is happening to these signs, what is the reading on these signs to the business owner. So relating this exercise, I like to always kind of do analogies to help understand. And I would relate this exercise to the human body. For example, you feel that you have a temperature. You feel that patients are not accepting treatment. So you always get some kind of a sign that is just not normal. So you have a temperature, and what do? You have a fever. You get the thermometer out, and you take your temperature. You keep track. If you feel that patients aren't accepting treatment, what do? You keep track of how much treatment was presented to patients, and then what treatment was performed. And then once you know you have a fever, you take action. You take 2, 3 ibuprofen. And once you find out that the percentage then of patient treatment is low, you need to take action. Otherwise, if you don't pay attention to the signs, then you just get sicker and sicker and sicker. And this is the exact same thing that happens with your practice if you keep your head buried in the sand and don't pay attention to these signs. Oh my gosh, can you believe my cell phone's ringing? I cannot believe that. And I thought I turned it on silent. Sorry about that. I'm going to turn it off. So let's talk about now the monitoring the signs of the day. You know, all day, every day in the dental practice, teams are looking for signs. They're looking for signs of tooth decay, signs of infection, signs that it's going to be a calm day or a hectic day. And they monitor this patient closely, looking for signs of improvement or potential problems. They look for signs that the schedule is going to blow open a great big hole because Mrs. Jones is 15 minutes late for a crown prep. And they're so focused on monitoring the signs of the day that they seldom take time to consider that those daily struggles and those frustrations and those challenges are actually vital signs that key practice systems are struggling. So do your practice's vital signs indicate that you're healthy, or do they indicate that your systems are sick? So that's the objective of this webinar and what we're going to try to find out tonight. So there are 6 vital signs to a practice that you need to measure and monitor, in my humble opinion. And that would be the patient volume. And also, obviously, how much treatment was presented and accepted, your collections, because you can't pay your bills if you don't make money, and scheduling, hygiene volume and cost of the hygiene department, and your overhead. There's certainly a lot more, but these, in my opinion, are extremely critical. And in addition to knowing the 6 areas, you also have to learn that some vital signs are industry specific and some are practice specific. So you may have heard me or another consultant will talk about industry standards or industry objectives. And of course, over the years, there's always the doubting Thomas that wants to know where that particular standard came from. I've had many doctors ask me that on different things over the year. Well, just where did that, because they obviously are disagreeing with it, and or obviously their practice isn't meeting that objective, and so then they doubt that and want to know where it came from. Well, it's a very good question. What I found is that the American National Standards Institute is a nonprofit organization that oversees the development of voluntary consensus standards for products, services, processes, systems, and personnel in the United States. The American Dental Association is the accredited dental standards body of that American National Standards Institute. Within the ADA, they manage two consensus bodies for standards development, one on dental informatics and one on dental products. Their goal is to help dentists streamline and empower their practices through the use of information technology. So I'm going to be sharing today and identifying which measurements are industry and those that you must establish individually mathematically for your practice. However, it's certainly very important to know the temperature of your practice's vital signs. So let's look at vital sign number 1, which is patient volume. The doctor and team are busy. The schedule appears to be packed. In fact, hygiene is even booked out 6 months. So therefore, that must mean the practice has plenty of patients, right? Unfortunately, busy is often an illusion. In fact, 80% of dental practices are losing more patients than they are bringing in new ones. So you have to ask yourself, what about yours? What's happening with yours? You can determine if you're losing patients by answering these 4 simple questions that you see on the slide. How many inactive patient records are taking up space in your files or on your computer? Are you converting 85% of your emergency patients to comprehensive exams? Now, some practices don't really have a lot of emergencies. Other practices have tons of emergencies, and then you have the in-between. A lot of that depends on the socioeconomics and the demographics of where the practice is located. It depends on the educational level of the patients in that particular demographic area as well. But we find certainly that a lot of practices get these emergency patients. They treat the emergency, and there's actually no thought process, or there's no selling process to convert these people to come back to have a comprehensive examination. Number 3, have you increased hygiene days per week in the last year? And I've spoken about that many times, and that can be a real key indicator. We're well past the Great Recession now. So we can't use that Great Recession as an excuse anymore. So in the last 12 months, have you increased hygiene days? And if you haven't increased by half a day, or even worse yet, that your days of hygiene per week have just have been basically the same, let's say for the last 3 or 4 years, then that is you got a fever going on, and probably even more than a fever, okay? You got a fever and a rash, both, okay? So this is not good. You have to pay attention to this. It means that the practice, is not growing. It's leveled at this point. And of course, you'll probably see your revenues and your production level out as well. Or number 4 is your hygienist salary more than 33% of what they produce, because it should not be. And you say, well, what's that got to do with patient volume? Well, what that has to do with patient volume is that the hygienist is not seeing enough patients in order to produce 3 times her salary. So that one indicator, that one vital sign right there, if hygiene salaries are 45% of what they produce, the first place that needs to be looked at is how much open time per day, per week, per month is in this hygiene schedule. So, and looking at the number of inactive patient records is very important. Although some of you you have different definitions, different criteria of when you determine that a patient is inactive. And therefore, a lot of you live in my opinion, a false, with rose-colored glasses on, a false illusion of what is actually happening with your practice, because you are not realistic in looking at who is truly an inactive patient. But when you look at the number of inactive patient records, or an inactive patient can be somebody who is past due for recall, and if that's enough to open up a second practice, or if you answered no to the questions that you see here on 2 or 3 and yes to question 4, then your patient retention is weak. And in most cases, what we find in our analysis of business operational systems in a practice is that patients are slipping through the cracks due to an ineffective recall system. Continuing on with this, you should absolutely make a specific number of calls to past due patients each day. So how are we going to try to correct a patient volume situation if we're seeing that vital sign? So I would recommend that you generate a report from your computer of all patients that are past due for recall in the past 12 months. This is your target audience. That is business just sitting in the computer. And of course, your objective is to reconnect with those inactive patients by assigning we call them a patient coordinator, to handle the specifics. And the specifics would be, obviously, number 2, you see there, to schedule a specific number of appointments. So, in other words, figure out how many outbound sales calls can be made by an individual in 6 to 8 hours. We find that that 8 hours of this call right after call can be stressful, and especially if they're not making a connection and with a person. So that's why I'm saying monitor how many outbound calls can be made in 6 hours, for example, and so let's say that that's 20 a day. And then set a goal of how many should result in scheduled appointments. Let's say your goal might be 25% of those. It has to result in a sale. To us, a sale is getting them on a schedule. So one day you might have 35% success rate, and the next day you might have 15%, but your average is going to be 25%, and that's what you're after. So you also want to look at having a specific number of patients that complete treatment. So they can verbally say, yes, I'm going to go with the treatment plan, but we want to make sure that they are actually completing the treatment. The next would be to schedule, so the hygienist achieves a specific daily or monthly financial goal. So I encourage you to stop filling in lines. Prophy will not get your hygienist to $1,200 to $1,400 a day in production. It might be prophy, and then it might be quad scanning and rear planing. I mean, this has to occur, and again, this can be a downfall of making those appointments 6 months and ahead when they are just prophys, and that the schedule then just gets filled up with that. Manage a specific number of unscheduled time units in the hygiene schedule, and I'm recommending to you that you have no more than 30 minutes of open time in the hygiene schedule. If you have somebody accountable on the system, such as a patient coordinator, then there really should not be any open time at all. And monitor and report on your recall progress monthly. In other words, how many patients are past due versus how many patients that came in that month. And that's measuring your patient retention. I can't talk enough. I always talk about patient retention. If you listen to all my web, patient retention. It's just a critical component of a practice that is so often ignored. Let's look at the patients now. I want you to make time for the new patients as well. New patient activity is very important. And so, for example, if you saw 150 new patients, let's say in the past 6 months, then that would be 25 per month, or that would be 8 a week. So my recommendation is that you would reserve at least that much time to handle new patient activity, different days, different times of day, to enhance customer service. Offer new patient appointments also during prime time, late afternoons and early mornings and evenings. Yeah, I know that's when everybody wants to come in, but this is, you're trying to, get that first impression to a new potential customer coming into your business, and if that's what they want and that's what they're asking for, then you need to make that available. If you have all your patients asking for that, then perhaps you need to reassess whether or not working 8 to 5 is in the best interest of the demographics of your area and the new patients and the patients that you treat. Remember that it costs 5 times as much to acquire one new patient as it does just to keep an existing one. So before you start spending money on mass marketing, make sure that you reach out to those who have been into your practice. I always say, it doesn't make good common sense to put a new roof on your house when the house has got termites. It doesn't make common sense to send invitations out to dinner when the house is filthy, dirty, and we haven't bought the groceries yet. Okay? So just keep that in your mind. Concentrate on building patient loyalty. And this is best achieved through ongoing communication with the patients. Like online newsletters, follow-up phone calls after their care, patient survey, a simple thank you email for choosing your practice. That communication is important because you don't want overkill on it, but you don't want to go from 1 6 months to the next 6 months and they haven't even heard one simple thing from you. Email is definitely a great way to do that. Get their email address. So you don't have to have any, just send out an email. So it can be a standard email, just thinking of you. Perhaps you saw on the news this information piece about dentistry, and I wanted to, share with you my thoughts. It's communication. Obviously, provide the very best in patient service you and your team can, and emphasize the value of your dentistry and market your services to your existing patient base. Because the more patients you keep coming back, the greater your source for new patients will be. And this is what dentists, when they call us and they're feeling some pain, there's a pain point somewhere in the practice, they don't know what's causing it, and we get many requests. Do you do marketing because I want more new patients? And so we're trying to ascertain whether or not that practice has kept the patients that they've had, and generally they haven't. If I have a dentist on the north side of town, and that dentist has 2,000 patients actively coming in for recall, and I have a dentist on the south side of town that has, let's say, 750 patients on recall, the dentist with the 2,000 patients will absolutely get more new patients in than the other doctor on the south side of town. because you have more patients being advocates and going out and telling other people, about you. And so that just makes common sense. Vital sign number 2, let's looking at treatment presented and accepted. And treatment acceptance should be at a minimum of 85% of treatment presented. But if you're not diagnosing it, you certainly aren't treating it. So, the patients have to come in, you have to diagnose it, you have to present it, and you have to sell it. And that's how dental practice makes money. So I want you to ask yourself if your assumptions are getting in the way. For example, you assume Marie, mother of 3, is not interested in veneers. She's too practical. Are you sure? Have you asked? Or you're convinced that Bob is wedded to his partial and he'd never, ever consider implants. Well, when was the last time you discussed the option with him? First, if you're going to make an assumption with what your patients want or can afford, please assume that each patient desires ideal dentistry and is willing to pay for it. I want you to have that mindset. When presenting your plan, remember your audience. While your idea of a treatment plan may be tooth numbers and notations, your patient wants the big picture. They want to know what's involved in the process. They want to know how many appointments and how much time will be required. What will happen? Will it hurt? How much will it cost? And what, if any, other options might there be? No, it doesn't need to be a flashy presentation, but it should answer the patient's questions and concerns thoroughly, and it needs to be in plain English. And one of the ways that it's easy to find that out is to ask your staff. Your team needs to feel safe when they give you the answer, and you, doctor, need not be defensive when you get the answer. But, employees will say, oh, I know, the patients come out here and they say, I didn't understand a word he said, because you're talking way over their head. I used to, I remember, well, it's not, you still don't have too many Yellow Page ads anymore, but back in the Yellow Page ad days, dentists would invariably put temporal mandibular joint dysfunction as one of the things that they did. Now, seriously, like the average consumer patient knows what the heck that is. You're talking to your colleagues. You're not talking to a patient. So I want you to think about that. I also want you to learn how to overcome your patient objections. Start just writing down and keeping a little diary or history of some of these objections. And I want you to do your best to stop taking them as a rejection. So, an objection can be certainly like, well, not now, or I can't justify the expense right now, or I'm just going to wait till it breaks, or I just want to think about it. For example, after presenting a treatment plan, let's say for a 3-unit bridge, the patient says, I can chew on that other side for now. It's no problem. I can wait. So the key word in that objection there is that they're going to wait. So you might come back and say, Mrs. Brown, the bridge will restore your ability to chew normally. And chewing on one side of your mouth will cause stress on your jaw, which could result in further breakdown of the teeth and possibly some jaw pain or discomfort related to the joint being overstressed. Waiting will not lower the cost and will cause undue damage to the teeth on the other side. Let's not wait for this to happen. So you have to have in your mind what it is, your most common objections, and how you are going to at least try to overcome that. So in taking the time to thoroughly discuss what you're recommending, you're also building trust and rapport with the patients. And timing is everything. People buy from people they trust. They don't buy from people who they think that is trying to pull a fast one, rip them off, maybe is really not knowledgeable about what it is they're talking about. So trust is very important. That means that presenting a treatment plan the first time you've met the patient is not a good idea. We still see dentists doing this on the first visit for the patient. And the patient comes into the practice and they're telling them what they see and what needs to be done, and it just blows the patients. It just blows them away. They're just not prepared for it. At least if you present what needs to be done at the second appointment, let's say showing you've taken time to review over your findings and you're demonstrating that you're genuinely concerned about providing them the best dentistry available. And the most important thing is that you care, that you really care about them. Because above all else, that's what they want to know. They want to know that you really care, that you are connected with them, and that they trust you. The first step in the treatment plan revenue potential area is, the first step is that all treatment plans have to be entered into the practice management software. And so if you're not sure that that is being done, doctors, then you have to find this out. Because we've gone into offices where we see that the front office person was not trained properly, excuse me, and therefore has not been doing it. For example, an occlusal pit on number 30 is a treatment plan. So I don't care if it's one simple thing that needs to be done. It's still considered treatment that needs to be rendered and needs to go into the treatment plan feature of the software. Then what I want you to do is to generate then an unscheduled treatment plan report from the computer. And so I would let's just do it for the last 6 months. And I want you to look at what the total amount is on that report. The total amount of money that you diagnosed that needed to be done that patients have not bought into. Excuse me. I want you to let it sink in how much more the practice could be doing if you had 25%, for example, accepted. And you can see here on the slide, this is an example. It's not unusual for us to see this amount of money in unscheduled treatment for the last 12 months. And if we got 70%, that turned around and 70% accepted, look how much more revenue potential the practice would have. So this is lost business to the business. And you can't fix something if you don't know it's broken. So that your first step is obviously you've got to run the report and you've got to look at it. You've got to check it out. Excuse me, vital sign number 3. Let's talk about collections. So here's the scenario. You and your team cannot possibly work any harder. That's how you feel. But every month the money is tight. You're sure that you're producing. The problem, your practice is likely floating too many loans to too many patients, and they are not expected to pay, and therefore they don't. So your accounts receivable should be less than 1 month of net production. And of course, if the percentage of accounts receivable over 90 days is exceeds 10%, then it's obviously it needs attention. It could be that there's no written financial policy. It could be that there's no expectations that patients are to pay. It could be that there's no clear procedure for collecting from patients. It could be that there's been no staff training at the front office. It could be that there's no measurements in place to monitor collections. Of course, the objective is to collect from the patient at the time of treatment. So, you know, for example, Mrs. Smith, I see that Dr. Jones performed tooth-colored restorations on 2 teeth that encompassed 5 surfaces, plus medication and anesthetic. The fee for today is bada bing, bada bang. Will you be paying that today by cash, check, or bank card? I think it's very important to express to the patient when you're telling them what the fees are for today. It's very important to express what it was that was done. Everything from anesthetic to medication in the teeth, whatever it is that you do. I mean, instead of just stating the fee, so then the patient is like, oh, okay, well, that took them about 20 minutes to do. All they have is the time, had their mouth open, you know, maybe a little discomfort, they couldn't swallow, whatever it is. So brag about the work, explain to the patient what they had done, and so they just perceive the value more. Billing, it's not unreasonable to expect full payment, of course, for charges of $200 or less, as long as you communicate that expectation to your patients politely in advance. I mean, it's not unreasonable to expect full payment no matter what the charge is. However, sometimes for more costly procedures, and then you've got insurance involved in there too, you need to be prepared to provide you know, some convenient payment options that are beneficial to both the patient and the practice. Or you need to, you know, consider obviously patient financing. But if you must bill the patients, my recommendation is that you bill on a daily basis. So let's say, for example, patient came in today, they didn't pay, you send them a statement 1 week later, or you send a statement the next day. So let's just say 1 week later. So 1 week after the patient was there, then the patient, and let's say that patient came in on the 8th of the month. 1 week after that would be the 15th. So people that came in on the 9th would get a statement on the 16th. People that came in on the 10th would get one on the 17th. But we are so ingrained about sending out statements once a month. Once a month. So it just doesn't really make sense when you stop and think about it. Insurance claims obviously need to be submitted electronically the day the service is performed. And the patient's portion should be collected at the time of dismissal. I had somebody just ask me the other day about, you know, should I tell her to get the patient's credit card and then we just, whatever it is, and we just charge it? I'm like, you know, you need to communicate this to the patient. Mrs. Smith, I see today that Dr. Jones performed bada bing, bada bang, and your fee for today is $300. Our computer estimates your insurance will pay $150. So you always say, you don't say I estimate, you say our computer estimates that your insurance will pay approximately this amount, leaving your portion of $150. Will you be paying that today by cash, check, or bank card? So you have to, you don't say, oh, we'll send that to your insurance and, you know, and then we'll send you a bill for, you know, whatever it is, you know, after that. No, that's not what we do. We're not going to do that. So we need to make sure that we're trying to get as much money from the patients as possible. And it's also important with insurance that the insurance claims for, that aren't paid, the delinquency on those are checked, right after, right after you expect a payment. If you expect a payment within 10 days, the 2 weeks, then somebody needs to be, checking on this. And of course, they have to have the time available to be able to do it. Also, on your billing statements, I want you to make sure that you have a due date on the statement. Every single bill we get in the mail has a due date, and yours cannot look any different. Putting on the statement payable upon receipt, it doesn't work. If it worked, the cable company would be doing it, the electric company would be doing it. People don't get the bill, sit down and write a check. They put them in the order of the due dates on the statements. And the due dates, there's no way I'd give them 30 days to pay, because nobody else gives you 30 days to pay your bills. So definitely no more than 2 weeks would I give them. So these are these are industry standards, and we're talking about the collection process. So the industry standard collection ratio of collections versus adjusted production, excuse me, is 98%. Or another way to say that is that you need to collect 98 cents out of every dollar that you produce. So why is it not 100%? Why is it not dollar for dollar? Well, ideally, yes, but it's not realistic, as there will be some patients who simply won't pay you. So this has become, that 98% has become then an industry standard in dental business. The system objectives that you see here of the 1 month of adjusted production, are industry standards, and that means that all practices should achieve these objectives. Interesting enough, however, now that, I've been a dental management consultant for over 30 years, I've seen that years ago, before we had patient financing and before we had credit cards, the accounts receivable were acceptable at 2 months worth of production, but that has not been the case for many years. So it's no more than 1 month of adjusted production. What I mean adjusted production, not what you produced, minus the adjustments, any discounts or insurance or anything like that, because you cannot collect what you cannot collect. So you can't collect 100% of your production if you're given a $100 senior citizen discount. So if your adjusted production is $70,000, then you should have no more than $70,000, excuse me, in your total accounts receivable, and that needs to be without credit balances. So when you run that AR report, I want you to run it without credit balances because the credit balances make the accounts receivable total look less than what it really is. Now the hygiene statistic that you see here can have some variances, especially if you have, for example, a general dentist who is doing huge amounts of implants and orthodontics that are high dollar items that escalate the doctor's production from traditional fillings and crowns. But I'm talking about lots, okay? So I want you to be realistic when you look at that. So you say, oh yeah, well I do a lot. Well, you don't do a lot. You think you do a lot, but that's not a lot, So it has to be huge dollar amounts, and because the hygiene will not ever be able to keep up to that, and those particular things will cause that. If your percent over 90 days past due is more than 10% of the accounts receivable, total accounts receivable, then your collection ratio at 98% then is not healthy. And why? Because you're going to start applying efforts to collect this past due money. You're going to start dialing for dollars. And at the same time, you're collecting 98% of what is currently being produced. You will be collecting not only the back money, but the present money, and therefore your collections should be over, or your collection ratio should be over 100%. So therefore 98% is not healthy. The over-the-counter collections, of course, patients, like I said, are expected to pay when they have treatment done, but then if we don't ask, we don't get it. So the 45% is indicative of a practice accepting assignment of benefits from the insurance company. If the practice does not accept assignment of benefits, then that percentage of over-the-counter should be 95% to 100, because you want the work, you do the work, you want paid. It's a cash practice. Now, if the collection ratio is less than 98%, there's a reason for that, and it needs to be uncovered. Generally, we find that the front office person is simply just not asking for the money because they feel in some way it's offensive to the patient and they don't want to hurt their feelings. So it just has to be part of the job. If you want to do the job, this is what you have to do, because this is important. Everybody wants their paycheck, and all the bills have to be paid, so we have to collect the money. Vital sign number 4 is scheduling. Your practice should have no more than 3 unscheduled 10-minute units per day. Yet scheduling, we see problems, and they run in extremes in offices. Some practices will struggle to fill gaping holes, while others are desperately trying to find a spare, unit here or there. Practices also that have too much time to fill typically have a very weak recall system, as well as inefficient or non-existent processes they have for tracking unscheduled treatment. They also likely have no marketing plan to promote services to existing patients or trying to bring in new patients. They also have staff and service issues that are driving patients away. But it takes the outside person to be able to bring that to their attention, because they're just still doing the same old thing the same old way. Dental teams whose days are spent constantly on the run are probably, they're like on roller skates. They're probably pre-scheduling entire treatment plans. They're likely not fulfilling the utilization also of their clinical assistants by the state law. Or you can have a dentist who is a perfectionist, that also has to be in control, that doesn't trust a clinical assistant to be able to deliver the same type of quality. Let's just say in a temporary crown, which would be one of the more common ones. And of course that's critical. So therefore, if they have these issues, they're likely not fully utilizing the assistant at all. And there's time and motion inefficiencies then. For example, the dentist may be in the habit of explaining the post-op care to patients, even though an assistant could do that. In other cases, a new business or office building may have recently opened up, and the practice is experiencing a sudden increase in new patients. So you could have, it could be either one, but still it's a vital sign that presents a problem. So no matter what your specific situation, your practice should be scheduling to reach a specific daily production goal. And of course that goal is figured individually for each office. I've always recommend that your production objective is first based off of the overhead of that business. Excuse me. If you don't have a daily goal, you have to get one. Why? Because, as I just said, the bills have to be paid. Employees want raises. Equipment breaks down and the rent goes up. And this dental practice has to make money in order to provide. So working backwards, Determine how much money per year the practice has to make. And then determine how many days per year, working days per year, that the producers are going to put towards that goal. And it's simply then just the yearly goal divided by the days that you're going to work. Use the computer also to schedule and track every failed or canceled appointment, as well as any unscheduled treatment. And again, resist the temptation to schedule more than one appointment for the patient on a multiple appointment treatment plan. Just limit it to just one or two appointments, no more than 2 at a time. And if your state allows expanded functions for assistants, then implement them. Overlap patients during the first and last 10 minutes of each appointment, if at the minimum, if you're not scheduling to doctor time and assistant time. And also set aside time every day when you have your daily meeting with the team to discuss the upcoming schedule for the next 2 days. Do not talk about just today. I want you to talk about the next 2 days. Vital sign number 5, hygiene volume and cost. If your and I said this earlier too, if your hygiene days have not increased in the last 2 years, it's a sign of system breakdown. And unless you've made some kind of some type of conscious, decision to not do that, then it's a sign that the systems are breaking down somewhere. Another less obvious but equally serious indicator is a hygiene salary that is more than 33% of production. So the third key indicator of major trouble is a schedule that cannot accommodate patients that are due this month until next month or later, because hygiene has been, pre-scheduled and it's booked out and out and out. So when it comes to the business side of hygiene, you want to follow the rule of 33. Hygiene services should account for 33% of the total practice production. The amount of interceptive periodontal therapy they do should account for 33% of the hygiene production. And finally, the hygienist's salary should be about 33% of his or her production. But achieving that 33% benchmark requires careful monitoring, scheduling to meet production goals, and a willingness to consider that 6-month scheduling may be hurting your hygiene department more than it's helping. And if you've heard any of my other webinars, I'm the only one, I think, in the industry that speaks out about the problems that kind of protocol can cause, because we've seen it we see it in practically every practice that we go into. I want you to review the hygiene schedule regularly to determine the number of cancellations and failed appointments that are the result of pre-scheduling recall patients. And you need to track that. You need to know the number every day. Write it down somewhere on a calendar or something. Write it down to determine how much open time. If you multiply that by what your average recall fee is, and then you look and see how much money you're losing. Measure your patient retention every month by dividing the number of patients that are due to come in for recall by the number of recall patients that were actually performed for the month. Also, establish the number of hygiene days that you need to match the demand for hygiene appointments. If you've had 5 days of hygiene a week for the past 3 years, you probably don't need 5 days, because you're probably losing more people out the back door, but you're still trying to maintain 5 days, and that's why you've got holes in the schedule. Train the patient retention coordinator so that she or he is qualified to be accountable for the recall system. So you have to have accountability for it. And implement a recall system that conveys the value of the oral hygiene appointment. The patients that don't come in don't perceive the need. Evaluate your fees. Maybe your fees need to be increased. Customize the time for hygiene based on the need rather than a standard 1 hour allocation for each patient, which is the most common. And don't make your patients wait to see the hygienist. They won't stick around. So, they need an appointment. We need to be able to accommodate them. I've always said new patients have to get in within 1 week. Vital sign number 6 is your overhead. So 55 to 65% is within an acceptable range. Industry standard ideal, in quotation marks, ideal, is 55%, and the figures that you see below make up that 55%. However, you see I say 55 to 65%. It's difficult to get to 55%. 62 is okay, 65 is okay, but if you start going over 65, then we need to look at how we can possibly, reduce that. Dental supplies is not a fixed cost. So if collections, for example, are averaging $85,000 a month, then 5% for dental supplies, then whoever orders supplies should not spend any more and have a budget of no more than $4,250. Rent, however, is a fixed cost. So if it's more than 5%, you have to produce and collect more, unless you own the facility, and then you can you're building equity, and because you own it, so you're just exchanging equity for profit, which is fine. And laboratory is also not a fixed cost. If it's more than 10%, then look at the charge that you're paying the lab per unit versus what your fees are, and try to shoot for 7 to 8 times the lab charge. And if that fee would be unrealistic, then you probably can't afford to use the lab that you're using. Payroll is not a fixed cost, and that is it's the highest, as you can see, and it's usually an area that can be controlled. And no, it's not necessarily reducing salaries or no raises or laying people off, though it could be that you have people that are overpaid. You could be overstaffed. But generally, we find they're unproductive job descriptions. We also find many times it's caused by a hygienist who is a producer being paid a guaranteed amount of salary, but yet their schedule is riddled with cancellations and no-shows. And but they still get the same amount of money. So what are your top 10 takeaways for tonight? In most cases, office managers are dropped into the position with no training. The doctor assumes that if the employee has been with a practice for a while, or they interview with a resume indicating that they were an office manager someplace else, and they know what it takes to do the job. And let me assure you that learning by osmosis has never been an effective training method. So measure and monitor your patient volume, your treatment acceptance, your collections, your scheduling, and your hygiene. Busy is often an illusion. 80% of practices lose more patients than getting new ones. Generate a report of past due patients, delegate accountability, and make contact and set a goal. Have your treatment acceptance a minimum of 85% of the treatment presented. Learn how to overcome patient objectives. Number 6, accounts receivable no less than, or should be less than 1 month of net production. Number 7, make sure you schedule the production goals and stop filling in lines just to fill in lines to look busy. Reserve new patient times at diversified times. And in hygiene, follow the rule of 33. And try to keep your overhead at no higher than the 65% mark. What is your revenue and production potential in a practice? This all has to do with the vital signs. The reality is that if the practice isn't bringing in more money, then the owner can't afford to hand out more money, no matter how working and loyal the employees are. But that doesn't mean you have no control over your income potential. In fact, I hope today that I've shown you how the opposite is true. So I invite you to send me an email that you see there at the info@mackenziemgmt.com, and then I will send you a link to provide me with some numbers on your practice, and there's no cost to you. They come directly right to me. Nobody gets them but me. And so I will provide for you this revenue potential opportunity report. So if you want to know how your numbers compare to the industry, I'll either send you the link or you can write this down. So it's mackenziemgmt.com/optimize, which is OPTIMIZE _ practice _ potential.php. So mackenziemgmt.com/optimize _ practice _ potential.php. That particular link is hidden from public view, giving it special just to you, and you'll go on there and you can give me your numbers, and of course we have to talk to you to give it to you. I can't just send you the report and have you figure it out. But you can see over here on the right, this is an example practice that shows how much revenue opportunity existed in those particular areas. So I invite you to go to my website, and you can find out more information in regards to our consulting programs, our training programs. I have free podcasts on there and a lot of management products, and I also have a complimentary practice management library that you can search on topics that will give you more information on articles that I've written as well. And if you have any questions at all, you can direct those right to me at the info@mackenziemgmt.com.